Welcome to Your Mythology Book Club. I'm your host, Daniel. In this series, we're doing a very close reading of the Iliad, one book at a time. This is episode 5, and so we'll cover book 5. By listening to this entire podcast series, you will gain a thorough understanding and appreciation of the Iliad and many of its finer nuances. As always, I'll be reading the most critical parts of the Iliad, including all the dialogue, to you from the translation by Lang, Leaf, and Myers. The Iliad comes to us from the depths of time. It was ancient to the ancients, who collected it from among even older stories and compiled it into the version that we have. This means it's an artifact of literary culture that has been filtered through the minds of people from multiple time periods, each of which represent cultures far different from our own. Therefore, I'll go on tangents to explore some of the more confusing or intriguing historical, religious, and cultural points we'll come across. I'm not a professional scholar, but I am a very well-read amateur who has read various translations of the Iliad many, many times over the years. How I present the Iliad to you in this series is exactly how I read it each time, appreciating the language, enjoying the story, but also frequently pausing to ask why. Why are the characters doing these strange things? What about their time in history, their culture or religion would make them want to have done what they just did? Getting a handle on why the characters in the Iliad are doing some of the things they're doing will help us understand their motivations. Seeing their motivations in the light of their own time period, culture, and religion will allow us to discover the very human story that forms the heart of the Iliad. Book 5's action opens immediately after the closing of Book 4. There's absolutely no gap in time. In fact, this current day is day 1 of the Iliad's battles, and day 24 since the start of the Iliad. This single day lasts for a very long stretch of story narrative. This day started after Agamemnon awoke from his prophetic dream way back in Book 2, and it has already covered Books 3 and 4, and will go on to encompass the rest of Book 5, Book 6, and into Book 7. Now, this actual counting of days has been the subject of some debate over the years. The counting I'm using is by Mark Erickson in his blog post titled, "How Many Days Does Homer's Iliad Cover?" which you'll find linked in the show notes under Resources, Item 5. Now, since Book 5 picks up immediately where Book 4 left off, there's not much need for us to recap the previous book's events. Both armies are in the field, and battle has already begun, although we weren't following the events of battle for much of Book 4 because we were tagging along with Agamemnon on his mid-battle anxiety-driven inspection of the troops. 2 more things to keep in mind. 1, the effort at a truce between the Greeks and Trojans failed because Athene provoked a Trojan-allied archer named Pandaros to take a potshot at Menelaus, which Athene then swatted away so that he was essentially left unharmed, but with a bleeding wound that got the Greeks all fired up for revenge. And 2, there are gods on the field actively supporting each side right now. Apollo and Ares are out there for the Trojans, and Athene is on the battlefield supporting the Greeks. And that is where Book 5 begins, with Athene providing support and divinely inspired courage to one Greek in particular, Diomedes, in the form of an Aristeia. Book 5 will be dominated by the Aristeia of Diomedes, the absolute rampage of carnage Diomedes will go on with the help of Athene. His is the first of several Aristeia in the Iliad, and this one really sets the standard for all the rest. The word Aristeia is related to the modern Greek words aristocrat and aristocracy, but in the ancient Greek, the word has less of a social class connotation and was more just about being the best. Aristeia means prowess or excellence, according to the Liddell Scott Jones Ancient Greek Lexicon, and in the Iliad specifically, we use the word to mean a single warrior's most excellent display of battle prowess. And that is certainly the case here for Diomedes in Book 5. It's his time to shine. And because Book 5 is all about Diomedes, let's start this episode with an in-depth biographical look at this very important Greek hero, the youngest, and yet in some ways already the most accomplished among all the Greek heroes at Troy. Later on in this episode, we'll also get a biography of sorts of the Aegis, that mysterious object which was symbolic of the power of Zeus, wielded to great effect in this book by his daughter, the warrior goddess Athene. Diomedes was the son of Tydeus, king of Argos, one of the most important cities of Bronze Age Greece. In fact, Argos was so important that the Iliad's author often uses the word for the people of Argos, the Argives, as one of three shorthand words to refer to all the people of Greece. The others are Danaans and Achaeans. Since the Iliad is set within the period when the idea of a Greek identity was being formed, there are still multiple interchangeable ways of referring to what will eventually develop into a single national identity for all the Greeks as one people. The fact that the city of which Diomedes is now king is used as a way of referring to all Greeks points to the importance of his city. Now, to understand Diomedes as a man, we really need to understand his father, Titius. Titius had himself been a great warrior and, like Diomedes, a favorite of Athene. Titius was a monumental figure in Greek mythology, and just about any son other than Diomedes himself would have spent the rest of his life living under the shadow of such an important father. Once we hear a bit about Titius's life and what Diomedes has done in reaction to his father's life and death, you will see why Diomedes not only matched his father's epic achievements, he exceeded them. As a young man, Titius married Deipole, the daughter of Adrastus, king of Argos. It was through his entanglements with his father-in-law's politics that the rest of Titius's life, accomplishments, and death would be defined. Adrastus had gotten himself involved in the struggle over the throne of the city of Thebes, an important and powerful city-state of early Greece, and one that was, throughout ancient Greek history right up until its destruction by Alexander the Great, consistently of importance culturally, if not always militarily. Adrastus had taken the side of Polynices, prince of Thebes, who had been denied his rightful place as the king of Thebes. Without getting ourselves too off track here with all the details of the Theban throne and history, for our purposes now, we'll just state that Adrastus had married off his other daughter to Polynices. And this made Polynices and Titius brothers-in-law, and gave Titius an important reason to join the fight in Thebes. Promising his father-in-law that he would return his new brother-in-law to the throne of that very important city of early Greece, Titius, with the help of his brother-in-law Polynices as well as 5 other heroes of their generation, became the 7 against Thebes, and raised what was up until its time the largest army in Greek history, or mythological history anyway. The 7 against Thebes was one of the most famed mythic cycles of Greece, and there is hardly a hero of those times who doesn't have some connection to this great war of these 7 heroes and their army against the powerful city of Thebes. Unfortunately, none of the ancient Greek sources for this mythic cycle have survived directly into our times. But there are so many references to it in other sources that we have a very good idea of what happened, including the unfortunate end of Titius himself. While we don't have an ancient Greek source for the 7 against Thebes, we do have a later Roman version, an epic poem about the 7 against Thebes in the same vein as the Iliad, the Odyssey, and the Aeneid, called the Thebaid, written by Roman poet Statius. Statius had access to sources that have been lost to us, and so there's a lot of value in reading his version, even though it's not Greek. The 7 against Thebes waged an epic war against Thebes, and among the 7, Titius was outstanding in his accomplishments in battle. Before the war, Titius was sent alone as an embassy to Thebes to attempt a negotiation. This failed, and he returned to his camp, but on the way was ambushed by 50 men sent by the Theban king in a duplicitous act. However, Titius defeated 49 of them, leaving 1 alive to send back as a messenger to the Theban king. And the message was, "Don't mess with me again." Titius was an outstanding warrior, but out of his entire epic life, it was Titius's death that made the strongest impression on me, and I have to think would have affected Diomedes' perspective on his father and his own outlook on life and how to compose oneself as a warrior. Titius had received a mortal wound in battle. He was dying, but wasn't dead yet. Athene, always his great supporter, wanted to save Titius, and so she had to act quickly. Athene rushed off to get a special medicine that would not only restore Titius's health, but would make him immortal. This would be a great honor, almost never bestowed on a mortal, a mark of how much Athene loved Titius. While she was gone getting the medicine, the seer Amphiaraus foresaw a bit of the future and how he could make it happen. Now, even though Amphiaraus was one of the 7 against Thebes, and so nominally an ally of Titius, he had a real grudge against Titius. Amphiaraus's foresight gave him the knowledge that this was his one chance, his last chance, to get back at his enemy in a profound way. To enact his revenge, Amphiaraus cut off the head of the guy who had just mortally wounded Titius and handed the head to Titius. Why? The rest played out exactly as Amphiaraus had foreseen. In his dying rage, Titius saw the chance to get back at the man who had given him his mortal wound by eating his brains. Titius ate the brains of his killer. And this is the scene that Athene returned to. In disgust, the goddess dropped the medicine. No cannibal is worthy of Olympus. And then, oh my, this is the part that I don't know if Statius invented or if it was in the original Greek versions or not, but it was just so magnificent, dramatic, and destructive. I want to read it to you directly from the translation of the Thebaid by J.H. Mosley, Book 7, starting at line 794. And now, little by little, the earth began to shudder to its rending, and the surface to rock, and the dust to rise in thicker clouds. Already an infernal bellowing fills the plain. In alarm, they think it is the battle and noise of conflict, and hasten in their steps. A shock far different hurls arms and warriors and marveling steeds to earth. Already the leafy summits are nodding, and the walls, and Ismenos flees with all his banks exposed to view. Their wrath is abated. They fix their swaying weapons in the ground, or wandering meet and lean on their rocking spears, and start when they see each other's pallor. So when Bellona, scorning the deep, joins ships in battle on the sea, then, should a kindly tempest befall, all look to their own safety, and another death bids all their swords to be sheathed, and common fears make peace among them. Such was the appearance of the heaving combat on the plain. Whether the earth, laboring with imprisoned blasts, expelled the pent-up fury of the raging wind, or whether hidden waters ate away and wore down and sapped the crumbling soil, or the fabric of the rolling sky flung that way its weight, or Neptune's trident moved all the ocean and flung too vast a sea upon the shore, or whether that uproar was a tribute to the seer, or earth threatened the brothers, lo, in a gasping chasm the ground yawns, sheer and deep, and stars and shades feel mutual terror. Him the huge abyss engulfs and swallows the horses as they try to leap across it. He drops neither reins nor weapons, but, just as he was, drove his unshaken chariot down to Tartarus, and as he sank, looked back at the heavens, and groaned to see the plain meet above him, until a fainter shock joined once more the parted fields, and shut out the daylight from Avernus. So after all of Statius's flowery language, let's just get right down to exactly what happened at the moment of Titius's death. As he lay upon the battlefield dying, Athene has caught Titius eating the brains of the man who delivered him his death wound. In disgust, Athene turns away from the mortal she had championed and returns to Olympus, no longer willing to make this sinner immortal. But Athene wasn't the only one disgusted by Titius's cannibalism. The earth itself was disgusted. There's an earthquake that rattled the whole of the Theban plain and brought the battle to an absolute standstill. The groaning of the earth a deafening roar. A chasm then rent open the earth itself, and Titius, driving his chariot forward, was swallowed alive into the underworld. The very world was disgusted by his act and ejected him. It's like the world vomited him out. Now, that is an exit. This, then, is the death of Titius, father of Diomedes, a man whose revenge against his killer was so disgusting that the earth opened and swallowed him alive to shield the world of the living from his corruption. And this is the legacy that Diomedes had to live up to in some ways, and to avoid in others. A father who had been a great hero, but who had ultimately failed in two ways. One, Titius failed to defeat Thebes, which had been his main goal in life. And two, perhaps more importantly, Titius had failed to regulate his own reaction to his emotions. The battle rage which warriors used to face their enemies had overcome him, and he had lost his humanity. The way the ancient Greeks thought of their minds and their emotions was very different from how we see them. And it's really hard to get a handle on exactly what they thought about mind and emotions. The best I can do here is lay out some of the differences. We think of various feelings like anger and sadness as well, feelings, almost like sensations that arise in reaction to the meaning we ascribe to events in our lives. And these sensations affect our minds and influence how we react to things. But for the ancients, emotions could impact any of several various, I want to say, psychological entities within different parts of their bodies. And this means that to the ancients, there was not a single mind within a person, but rather various parts of oneself that could each be affected by emotions in various ways. In a number of instances in ancient Greek writings, characters are found to be arguing with their own internal psychological entities as though these conflicting feelings really are separate beings within a single person. The ancients had a remarkably similar view of the self to a book on free will and neuroscience I happen to be reading as I'm working on this episode titled Who's in Charge? Free Will and the Science of the Brain by Michael Gazzaniga, which posits that human consciousness is an emergent property of numerous brain areas functioning in parallel to one another, and that the seeming unity of our conscious selves is an illusion. Some of the psychological entities the ancients saw within themselves are easier than others for us to understand. The Phren performed rational, conscious functions, including speaking, and was thought to be located in the head, much as we imagine our rational minds to be. But others thought of the Phren, the same Phren, as being located in the chest, or even specifically the diaphragm, where it served to provide a stable center for the individual. Perhaps the voluntary act of breathing calmly was related to a diaphragmatic Phren. There was also a Noos, N-O-O-S, which was another kind of rational mind, but seems to have been a higher or deeper mind, and one that gods are also said to have. And this might have provided a kind of wisdom or deeper seat of truth in oneself. The Kratiae, or cardia, meaning the heart, was related to emotions that drive behavior, and may have been similar to how we think of our hearts. Like us, the ancients may have felt their hearts swelling with pride or anger, and this would disturb the stability of the Phren. The thumos was somehow related to the cardia, both likely located in the body itself, and the thumos, particularly in Homeric writings, seems to be a place where you hold and react to your negative emotions, at least according to author Shirley Sullivan in her article Disturbances of the Mind and Heart in Early Greek Poetry. I've linked to hers and to several other articles in the show notes about the ways in which the ancients thought of their emotions, as well as these various psychological entities, as it's really a very deep well, and much more so than we can get into here. But it's very much worth your time to explore, as you can find a lot of wisdom and understanding here. They had an entirely different way of conceptualizing their internal lives, one that seems to be no less valid than our own, and one which was more rich in exploring and explaining the disunity we can experience when we have conflicts between our emotions and our rational thought, or even among differing emotions. But to resume with Diomedes and how he chose to live in reaction to how his father had lived, and specifically how his father had died, it was the thumos, which was an internal urge for passions that Titius had lost control of. And therefore, we consistently see that Diomedes is characterized throughout the Iliad as someone who is constantly in perfect control of his thumos. Almost alone among the Greeks, Diomedes succeeds in this perfect control, and throughout the Iliad, but especially here in Book 5, we will see him riding the crest of his emotions, including his battle rage, to great success, but without ever going overboard. Diomedes provides us with the example of how a Greek hero should be, passionate but controlled, and a counterpoint to the excesses of our true protagonist, Achilles. Not only during the Iliad itself, in which Agamemnon and Achilles have already become victims to their own urges for self-glory and pride, respectively, but also after the Iliad, in which most of the Greeks have troubled homecomings if they come home at all, due to the excesses they allow themselves and their thumoses during the rampage they go on against the Trojans in their terrible and total victory over that city. Diomedes not only survives the post-Homerica, but thrives, and has various legends about his post-war life and his further accomplishments long after the war. Before the Trojan War had even begun, Diomedes had already succeeded where his father had failed in the first way. Diomedes, along with the other sons of the seven against Thebes, had already taken Thebes. But even more importantly, here in the Iliad, where so many of the other Greeks have already or will eventually succumb to their emotions, Diomedes maintains perfect control throughout. A passionate man, but not one ruled by his passions. Diomedes is our example of what an ancient Greek hero should be. Now that we have a better understanding of why young Diomedes is such an outstanding warrior and very much worthy of the Iliad's first Aristeia, let's get into the text and witness the carnage that Diomedes and Athene will bring to the Trojans. But now to Tydeus' son Diomedes, Pallas Athene gave might and courage, for him to be preeminent amid all the Argives and win glorious renown. She kindled flame unwearied from his helmet and shield, like to the star of summer, that above all others glittereth bright after he hath bathed in the ocean stream. In such wise kindled she flame from his head and shoulders, and sent him into the midst, where men throng the thickest. Book 5 opens hot, with Athene granting powers to Diomedes. This is the beginning of his Aristeia, his most glorious performance in battle. His helmet and shield are glowing like a flame as he enters the battle with power and courage of the goddess of war, strategy, and skill. Yes, and she's my personal favorite god, Athene. The star referenced is likely Sirius, whose rising in late summer was an important sign to the Greeks of the changing seasons, and often a sign of bad things to come. Sirius was associated with the dangerous, unhealthy heat, the dog days of summer, and in this case, Diomedes is glowing like that star of ill omens, a malicious sign to any Trojans who encountered Diomedes today. Now there was amid the Trojans one Dares, rich and noble, a priest of Hephaestus, and he had two sons, Phegeus and Idaeus, well skilled in all the art of battle. These separated themselves and assailed him face to face, they setting on him from their car, and he on foot upon the ground. And when they were now come near in onset on each other, first Phegeus hurled his far-shadowing spear, and over Tydides' left shoulder the spear point passed, and smote not his body. Then next Tydides made a spear cast, and the javelin sped not from his hand in vain, but smote his breast between the nipples, and thrust him from the chariot. So Idaeus sprang away, leaving his beautiful car, and dared not to bestride his slain brother, else had neither he escaped black fate. But Hephaestus guarded him and saved him in a veil of darkness, that he might not have his aged priest all broken with sorrow. And the son of great-hearted Tydeus drave away the horses and gave them to his men to take to the hollow ships. But when the great-hearted Trojans beheld the sons of Dares, how one was fled and one was slain beside his chariot, the spirit of all was stirred. The first two warriors Diomedes comes up against are brothers Phegeus and Idaeus, two sons of a priest of Hephaestus, Dares. There's a trope in the Iliad of two brothers fighting together, giving the added drama to the audience of the possibility that their father will lose both his sons on one terrible day in battle. From his chariot, Phegeus throws his spear at Diomedes, but misses. Diomedes throws his spear, which strikes Phegeus full on the chest, knocking him from the chariot. His brother Idaeus jumps down from the chariot, and in this instance, many would have made a noble stand, defending the body of their slain brother. But Idaeus must have had a premonition that this wasn't a good idea. And here we have an isolated incident of a pro-Greek god acting on behalf of a Trojan. Hephaestus casts a darkness over Idaeus, hiding him from Diomedes, to prevent his priest Dares from losing both his sons in a single terrible day of battle. So the two brothers trope gets a twist here, courtesy of Hephaestus. I'm going to share an aside about Hephaestus here, as he's more than just a metalworking god. Like Athene, Hephaestus represented clever, skilled work, and he was also important in Athens. Like Poseidon, Hephaestus was something of a rival to Athene in the worldview of the Athenians. And let's keep in mind that the Iliad as we have it in this form was ultimately compiled by Athenians. And there's still a temple of Hephaestus near the Agora of Athens, which is in great shape by virtue of its having been repurposed and maintained as a Christian church. With Diomedes now rampaging against the Trojans, Athene's next goal is to deprive the Trojans of their divine support on the battlefield, the god Ares. But bright-eyed Athene took impetuous Ares by the hand and spake to him and said, Ares, Ares, blood-stained bane of mortals, thou stormer of walls, can we not now leave the Trojans and Achaeans to fight, on whichsoever it be that Father Zeus bestoweth glory, but let us twain give place and escape the wrath of Zeus. Then she made him sit down beside loud Scamandros. Athene has lured Ares off the battlefield by indicating that they both will leave together, and she has him sit down next to the noisy river, I guess to keep him distracted? Of course, this is a trick, only the first of two deceptions she pulls over on Ares here in Book 5. Athene has no intention of staying away from the battle long herself, and has given great power to Diomedes. The Trojans are now left without the aid of Ares, so things are looking really good for the Greeks about now. You'll never see Ares do anything clever like this. He's a big meathead here in the Iliad, and honestly, he plays an incredibly minor role in Greek mythology overall. He's nothing like as important as his Roman counterpart Mars. I love how Athene concludes by making like she's conspiring with Ares to escape the wrath of Zeus. Ares should know by now that Athene is Zeus's favorite. She can do no wrong by Zeus. Now that Athene wound Diomedes up, getting Ares off the battlefield will ensure the Greeks can advance. And Ares just falls for it like the big meathead he is. Being good in battle like Ares is okay, I guess, but being clever and sneaky in battle, that's the best, at least according to the ancient Greeks, and Athene personifies this quality. The Danaans pushed the Trojans back. Each one of the captains slew his man. First, Agamemnon, king of men, thrust from his chariot the lord of the Halizonians, great Odios, for as he first turned to fight Agamemnon, thrust his dart into his back between his shoulders, and drave it through his breast, and he fell with a crash, and his armor clanged upon him. This is that recurrent phrase that I love so much, and his armor clanged upon him. Here Homer is describing the fall of the armed warrior named Odios. And if you haven't noticed it already, you'll start to see, or rather hear it, fairly often now that I've pointed it out. Imagining a warrior decked out in bronze armor, being killed, crashing to the ground. It's a big sound effect. I kind of love it. In my mind, there's a magnificent ringing sound every time a warrior in his bronze armor topples to the ground. And Meriones slew Phereclos, son of Tecton, Harmon's son, whose hands were cunning to make all manner of curious work. For Pallas Athene loved him more than all men. He likewise built Alexander the trim ships, source of ills, that were made the bane of all the Trojans and of himself, because he knew not the oracles of heaven. Him Meriones pursued, and overtaking him smote him in the right buttock, and threw past the point straight to the bladder beneath the bone, and he fell to his knees with a cry, and death overshadowed him. Then Meges slew Pedios, Antenor's son, that was a bastard, yet goodly Theano nurtured him carefully like to her own children, to do her husband pleasure. To him Phyleus' spear-famed son came near, and with keen darts smote him upon the sinew of the head, and right through amid the teeth the point of bronze cleft the tongue's root. So he fell in the dust, and bit the cold bronze with his teeth. If you're reading an abridged version like the Langleaf and Myers, which I have a pocket edition of, you might not have gotten this little detail where Meriones of Crete has just brought down the man who built Paris's ships, Phereclos. A bit of revenge for the Greeks here, and it's probably not coincidental that the man who gave him this revenge was one of the Cretans, they who were hosting Menelaus, while Alexandros violated Menelaus' trust as a guest. The guest-slash-host relationship was extremely important in ancient Greece. We see various examples of it here and there in the Iliad, but in the Odyssey, you'll see it will become a central theme. And by Eurypylos, Euaemon's son, noble Hypsenor, son of the high-hearted Dolopion, that was appointed Scamandros' priest, and like to a god was held in honor of the folk. By Eurypylos, Euaemon's glorious son, he, as he fled before him, was pursued and smitten on the shoulder with a sword thrust, and his heavy arm was shorn away. All bleeding, the arm fell upon the earth, and over his eyes came gloomy death and forceful fate. Eurypylos defeats Hypsenor, a priest of Scamandros. So first off, I'll mention here that there are two characters in the Iliad named Eurypylos, and they're on opposite sides of the war. This one here is the Eurypylos, son of Euaemon, who's on the Greek side. Neither of the Eurypyloses is really a major character, so you don't have to worry much if you confuse the two, although they both have pretty deep backstories, like many of the characters in the Iliad, no matter how minor. So the guy this Eurypylos has defeated is the priest of the god/river Scamandros, which is the river on the plain of Troy between the ships of the Greeks and the city itself. It's the same river that Athene just parked Ares by. And rivers were often revered as gods. This particular river, Scamandros, plays a very important part in the Iliad, not just as part of the landscape, but also as a god, as a character who later on will get involved in the battle himself. I've linked a map of the Trojan region in the show notes under Resources Item 1. It's worth taking a look at if your Iliad copy doesn't have a map, as sometimes the geography as described in the text can be a little confusing, especially once we get to the craziness that is Book 7. But where is Diomedes this whole time? The narrator has set the stage with all of this regular battle, and now we will join Diomedes in his divinely inspired Aristeia rampage. So labored these in the violent melee, but of Tydides man could not tell with whom he rejoined, whether he consorted with Trojans or with Achaeans, for he stormed across the plain like a winter torrent at the full, that in swift course scattereth the causeways. Neither can the long lines of causeways hold it in, nor the fences of fruitful orchards stay its sudden coming when the rain of heaven driveth it. And so before it perish in multitudes the fair works of the sons of men. Thus before Tydides the serried battalions of the Trojans were overthrown, and they abode him not, for all they were so many. Diomedes' rampage is unstoppable, and his movement across the battle lines is so free that it's not clear which side he's even on. No number of massed Trojans are able to stop him. Flame shining from his helmet and shield, the divine light of Athene, as he alone advances against the entire enemy force. Diomedes is likened to a river, so swollen with snowmelt that he's raging across the plain and destroying everything in his path. This is an Aristeia. This is the ideal image of a Homeric hero right here. But who's on the scene? None other than that same Pandaros we met in Book 4, the Trojan archer with a chip on his shoulder. In Book 4, Athene used his insecurity to trick him into violating the truce. Pandaros feels he doesn't get the credit he deserves because archery isn't as respected as hand-to-hand combat. And Pandaros is always on the lookout for a way to prove himself. And here comes Diomedes, rampaging far ahead of the battle lines. He's an easy target for Pandaros' arrows and a way for a guy with a chip on his shoulder to prove himself. Is Diomedes really unstoppable? Pandaros wants to find out. But when Lycaon's glorious son marked him storming across the plain, overthrowing battalions before him, anon he bent his crooked bow against Tydides and smote him as he sped onwards, hitting hard by his right shoulder the plate of his corslet. The bitter arrow flew through and held straight upon its way, and the corslet was dabbled with blood. Over him then loudly shouted Lycaon's glorious son, "Bestir you, great-hearted Trojans, urgers of horses! The best man of the Achaeans is wounded, and I deem that he shall not long endure the violent dart, if verily the king, the son of Zeus, sped me on my way from Lycia." Pandaros has taken aim and shot Diomedes in the shoulder. The arrow pierced him, and the Trojans can see that Diomedes is bleeding. Pandaros has boldly announced to his fellow Trojans that this will stop Diomedes. Does being shot with an arrow stop Diomedes? Seriously? Does anyone think this is going to work? So spake Pandaros boasting. Yet was the other not vanquished of the swift dart. Only he gave place and stood before his horses and his chariot and spake to Sthenelus, son of Capaneus. Haste thee, dear son of Capaneus, descend from thy chariot, to draw me from my shoulder the bitter arrow. So said he, and Sthenelus leapt from his chariot to earth, and stood beside him, and drew the swift shaft right through, out of his shoulder, and the blood darted up through the pliant doublet. So Diomedes is called out to his friend, Sthenelus, who's nearby in the chariot, to come pull out the arrow from his shoulder. And since the arrowhead is presumably barbed and would be more difficult to pull it out the way it came, Sthenelus just pulls the whole arrow clean through Diomedes' shoulder. And that is some badass battlefield medicine right there. Then Diomedes of the loud war cry prayed thereat. Hear me, daughter of aegis-bearing Zeus, unwearied maiden. If ever in kindly mood thou stoodest by my father in the heat of battle, even so now be thou likewise kind to me, Athene. Grant me to slay this man, and bring within my spear-cast him that took advantage to shoot me, and boasteth over me, deeming that not for long shall I see the bright light of the sun. So said he in prayer, and Pallas Athene heard him, and made his limbs nimble, his feet and his hands withal, and came near, and spake winged words. Be of good courage now, Diomedes, to fight the Trojans, for in thy breast I have set thy father's courage undaunted, even as it was in knightly Tydeus, wielder of the buckler. Moreover, I have taken from thine eyes the mist that erst was on them, that thou mayest well discern both God and man. Therefore, if any god come hither to make trial of thee, fight not thou face to face with any of the immortal gods, save only if Aphrodite, daughter of Zeus, enter the battle. Her smite thou with the keen bronze. So Diomedes has prayed to Athene for revenge upon Pandaros, and Athene answered his prayer immediately. And rather than just helping Diomedes get revenge upon Pandaros, Athene has granted Diomedes 3 gifts instead, each much better than simple revenge. We'll get to the first gift, but let's start off by talking about the second and third. The second gift Athene grants Diomedes is the ability to see through the disguises that gods use to hide themselves, so that he can avoid fighting with any gods that he shouldn't face, like Apollo, who will show up soon. But that is not all, because with her second gift, Athene specifically says that Diomedes will be able to attack Aphrodite. Permission to attack a god. Very cool. Now let's get back to that first gift, which is that Athene has put into Diomedes' heart the fury of his father. And as you'll recall, it was Tydeus' fury that in the end was his undoing. So this gift is dangerous. Let's hope Diomedes is able to control himself better than his father did. So saying, bright-eyed Athene went her way, and Tydides returned and entered the forefront of the battle. Even though erst his soul was eager to do battle with the Trojans, yet now did threefold courage come upon him, as upon a lion when some shepherd in the field guarding his fleecy sheep hath wounded, being sprung into the fold, yet hath not vanquished him. He hath roused his might, and then cannot beat him back, but lurketh amid the steading, and his forsaken flock is affrighted, so that sheep are cast in heaps, one upon the other, and the lion in his fury leapeth out upon the high fold. Even so, in fury, mingled mighty Diomedes with the Trojans. With his father's fury in him, Diomedes is now said to have 3 times the fury he had before. He's like a lion, wounded to enragement by a shepherd, loose among the sheep. That's the image of Diomedes now, as the Trojans, like sheep, are huddled one against another in fear of him. There slew he Astinoos and Hypeiron, shepherd of the host. The one he pierced above the nipple with his bronze-shod dart, the other with his great sword upon the collarbone beside the shoulder he smote, and severed the shoulder from neck and back. Them he left there, and pursued after Abas and Polyidus, sons of old Eurydamas, dreamer of dreams. Yet discerned he no dreams for them when they went, but stalwart Diomedes despoiled them. Then went he after Xanthos and Thoon, sons of Phinops, striplings both, but their father was outworn of grievous age, and begat no other son for his possessions after him. Then Diomedes slew them, and bereft the twain of their dear life, and for their father left only lamentation and sore distress, seeing he welcomed them not alive returned from battle, and kinsmen divided his substance. Then caught he 2 sons of Priam, the seed of Dardanos, riding in one chariot, Echemon and Chromios, as a lion leapeth among the kine, and breaketh the neck of one cow or heifer grazing in a woodland pasture. So Tydeus' son thrust in ill wise from their chariot, both of them unwilling, and thereafter despoiled them of their arms, and the horses gave he to his comrades to drive them to their ships. So Diomedes has resumed his rampage, stabbing Astinoos in the chest, and chopping Hypeiron's collarbone, nearly severing his neck from his head. Then he goes after 2 brothers, Abas and Polyidus, sons of the dream interpreter Eurydamas. who is referenced with the lovely phrase, dreamer of dreams, and who had failed to foresee his son's deaths in any of his own dreams. The two brothers trope stands in this case. Yet even with triple of fury, Diomedes still remembers to strip the valuables from those he slays. And now another pair of brothers foolishly get in Diomedes' way, Achaemon and Chromios, two sons of the Trojan king Priam. These brothers also bite the dust. Now that Diomedes has killed a couple of the Trojan king Priam's sons, and Priam famously had 50 sons, so even though he's got some to spare, the Trojans are dismayed at losing a couple of princes from among their dozens all at once. Him Aeneas beheld, making havoc of the ranks of warriors, and went his way along the battle and amid the hurling of spears, seeking godlike Pandaros, if haply he might find him. Lycaon's son he found, the noble and stalwart, and stood before his face, and spake a word unto him. Pandaros, where now are thy bow and thy winged arrows, and the fame wherein no man of this land rival thee, nor any in Lycaea boasteth to thy better? Go to now, lift thy hands in prayer to Zeus, and shoot thy dart at this fellow, whoe'er he be that lordeth it here and hath already wrought the Trojans much mischief, seeing he hath unstrung the knees of many a brave man, if indeed it be not some god wroth with the Trojans, in anger by reason of sacrifices. The wrath of God is a sore thing to fall on man. Upset at losing a couple of their Trojan princes, and worried that no one will be able to stop Diomedes, the Trojan hero Aeneas has been watching Diomedes' rampage and has come up with a plan. And Aeneas' plan is maybe a little behind the times, shall we say? Because Aeneas wants Pandaros, of all people, to take another shot at Diomedes, thinking that his famously accurate archery is the way to stop Diomedes. Wait, did he not see just a few minutes ago how the last one, pulled the arrow out? Does Aeneas not know that goofy doofus music plays in my mind every time Pandaros shows up on the scene? Diomedes just had his buddy yank the last arrow out, and he immediately resumed rampaging. Diomedes is a stone-cold killer, and Pandaros is a useless clown. Maybe Aeneas didn't see what we just saw? Despite all the reasons not to pursue this plan, Aeneas has gone looking for Pandaros anyway. Now, Aeneas is one of the major captains of the Trojans, although not at the level of Hector. Aeneas is the son of Aphrodite herself, and later mythology makes him the ancestor of Romulus and Remus, and therefore the progenitor of the Romans. Much later, by linking their story to Aeneas, the Romans were able to insert themselves into the story of the Iliad. Having a connection to the events of the Iliad was important to the Romans, because that's how you had a pedigree in the Greek-dominated culture of the Eastern Mediterranean. Aeneas is their link. And Aeneas was the hero of the epic we call the Iliad, written by the Roman author Virgil. I've read the Iliad several times. It's an amazing and complex piece of literature that I wholeheartedly recommend you read also. So, to put his crummy plan into motion, Aeneas finds Pandaros, here references Lycaon's son, and asks him to try stopping Diomedes with another arrow. And Pandaros quickly responds with a whiny, rambling speech that I did not see coming. And Lycaon's glorious son made answer him, Aeneas, counselor of the mail-clad Trojans, in everything I liken him to the wise son of Tydeus. I discern him by his shield and crested helmet, and by the aspect of his horses. Yet know I not surely if he be not a god. But if it be the man I deem, even the wise son of Tydeus, then not without the help of a god is he thus furious, but some immortal standeth beside him, with a cloud wrapped around his shoulders, and turned aside from him my swift dart, even as it lighted. For already have I shot my dart at him, and smote him his right shoulder, right through the breastplate of his corslet, yea, and I thought to hurl him headlong to Adonis, yet I vanquished him not. Surely it is some wrathful god. And I have no steeds at hand, nor any chariot whereon to mount. Yet in Lycaon's halls are 11 fair chariots, new wrought, with gear all fresh, and cloths spread over them, and beside each standeth a yoke of horses, champing white barley and spelt. Moreover, Lycaon the aged spearman at my departing laid instant charge upon me in our well-builded house. He bade me mount horse and chariot to lead the Trojans in the violent melee, but I obeyed him not. Far better had that been, but spared the horses, lest in the great crowd of men they should lack fodder that had been wont to feed their fill. Therefore I left them, and am come on foot to Ilios, trusting to my bow. And now must my bow not help me. Already I have aimed at 2 princes, Tydeus and Atreus' son. And both I smote, and surely drew forth blood, yet only roused them the more. Therefore in an evil hour took I from the peg my curved bow, on that day when I led my Trojans to lovely Ilios, to do noble Hector pleasure. But if I return, and mine eyes behold my native land and wife, and great palace lofty roofed, then may an alien forthwith cut my head from me, if I break not this bow with mine hands, and cast it upon the blazing fire. Worthless is its service to me as air. Having been given a chance by the Trojan captain Aeneas to redeem himself, take another shot at Diomedes, and maybe save the Trojans from the devastation Diomedes is inflicting on them, Pandaros is instead saying, "No, man, I'm good." His whole speech is a long, rambly response full of excuses, the subtext of which is that he feels he's let down his father, this famous Lycaon. Pandaros says it looks like Diomedes must be protected by a god, and that he's tried shooting both Diomedes and Menelaus without luck, and it only made them more angry. So, why bother? What's really going on with Pandaros and his little meltdown here is that he's regretful he didn't listen to his father, that he didn't take horses and chariot to war. At the time, he was afraid that the horses would lack food in the midst of war, so he just came on foot to battle with his bow. Pandaros is now seeing that this was a big mistake. There's no glory in archery, and it seems to him that his opportunity to make his father proud of him is just slipping away. Then Aeneas, captain of the Trojans, answered him, "Nay, talk not thus. Naught shall be amended before that we with horses and chariot have gone to face this man, and made trial of him in arms. Come then, mount upon my car, that thou mayest see of what sort are the steeds of Tros, well skilled for following or for fleeing hither or thither very fleetly across the plain. They will even bring us to the city safe and sound, even though Zeus hereafter give victory to Diomedes, son of Tydeus. Come therefore, take thou the lash and shining reins, and I will stand upon the car to fight, or else withstand thou him, and I to the horses will look." Aeneas convinces Pandaros that their situation against Diomedes isn't going to get any better unless they actually face him in battle using a chariot and horses, and that Pandaros can ride in Aeneas' chariot with him and try shooting arrows at Diomedes from there. Or Pandaros can drive the chariot and Aeneas will fight. Aeneas also mentions the steeds of Tros. These are his horses that are descended from divine horses. Aeneas' horses are a hot item that anyone would want to get their hands on. Diomedes will actually describe the lineage and history of these horses soon, so I'll leave that to him. To him made answer Lycaon's glorious son, "Aeneas, take thou thyself the reins, and thine own horses. Better will they draw the curved car for their wonted charioteer, if perchance it hap that we must flee from Tydeus' son, lest they go wild for fear, and will not take us from the fight, for lack of thy voice. And so the son of great-hearted Tydeus attack us, and slay us both, and drive away the whole hooved horses. So drive thou thyself thy chariot and thy horses, and I will await his onset with my keen spear." So saying, mounted they upon the well-dight chariot, and eagerly drave the fleet horses against Tydides. Pandaros is now down to join Aeneas in attacking Diomedes from the chariot. This is a big turnaround from his "I'm going to break my bow and pout" meltdown just a minute ago. But Pandaros makes it clear that he wants Aeneas to drive the horses while he does the attacking. And Pandaros isn't going to use his bow after all. He's going to attack Diomedes with a spear. This is everything Pandaros' father wanted from his son, to be in the midst of battle, mounted on a chariot, facing his opponents man to man. I don't have a good feeling about Pandaros going up against Diomedes anytime, much less during Diomedes' Aristeia, but after his little battlefield meltdown, it looks like Pandaros is trying to become the warrior his father wanted him to be. If it makes the old man proud, then I guess that's what Pandaros is finally going for. Seems a little desperate, Pandaros wanting to grab glory at any cost. And Sthenelus, the glorious son of Capaneus, saw them, and anon spake to Tydides winged words. "Diomedes, son of Tydeus, dear to mine heart, I behold 2 stalwart warriors eager to fight against thee, endued with might beyond measure. The one is well skilled in the bow, even Pandaros, and he, moreover, boasteth him to be Lycaon's son. And Aeneas, boasteth himself to be born of great-hearted Anchises, and his mother is Aphrodite. Come now, let us give place upon the chariot. Neither rage thou thus, I pray thee, in the forefront of battle, lest perchance thou lose thy life. We switch now from Aeneas and Pandaros over to Diomedes. Diomedes' buddy, Sthenelus, warns Diomedes that he sees Aeneas and Pandaros coming at him with a chariot and wants him to stop raging outside their lines. It would be safer if Diomedes would just retreat back to the Greek lines in the chariot with Sthenelus. And he's also given a little biography of the two men who are coming to attack him. Part of the drama of the Iliad is that everyone knows everyone, and they're always sizing each other up. If you ever watched Dragon Ball Z back in the day, it's a lot like that. Who's the next big baddie? What's their power level? Is it over 9,000? Okay, we don't have power levels in the Iliad, but Sthenelus is genuinely nervous about these two guys coming after Diomedes. Then stalwart Diomedes looked sternly at him and said, Speak to me no word of flight, for I ween that thou shalt not at all persuade me. Not in my blood is it to fight a skulking fight or cower down. My force is steadfast still. I have no mind to mount the chariot, nay, even as I am will I go to face them. Pallas Athene biddeth me not to be afraid. And as for these, their fleet horses shall not take both back from us again, even if one or other escape. And this moreover tell I thee, and lay it thou to heart. If Athene, rich in counsel, grant me this glory, to slay them both, then refrain thou here these my fleet horses, and bind the reins tight to the chariot rim, and be mindful to leap upon Aeneas' horses, and drive them forth from the Trojans amid the well-grieved Achaeans. For they are of that breed whereof far-seeing Zeus gave to Tros recompense for Ganymede his child, because they were the best of all horses beneath the daylight and the sun. That blood Anchises, king of men, stole of Laomedon, privily putting mares to them. Thereof a stock was born him in his palace, even 6. 4 kept he himself, and reared them at the stall, and the other twain gave he to Aeneas, deviser of rout. Them could we seize, we should win us great renown. Diomedes is not at all afraid, and rebukes Sthenelus for even suggesting that he retreat back within the Greek lines. Athene's strength is in him. Diomedes confidently says that Aeneas and Pandaros won't both escape. At most, one or the other will be able to escape. Diomedes recognizes that Aeneas and Pandaros are coming at them with the divine horses of Tros, and works out a plan to steal those horses from Aeneas. So here we get the history of these horses. They are descended from horses that were given to the early Trojan hero Tros, for whom Troy is named, in recompense for when Zeus stole Tros' son Ganymede. This was an unpleasant episode in which Zeus took a fancy to a young boy, and anyway, these horses' ancestors were the payment. Diomedes goes on to say that Aeneas' father Anchises had secretly bred these horses without the permission of their owner Laomedon, the previous king of Troy before Priam. So these are the bastard descendants of divine horses. That's a lot of horse history we just learned. Anyway, we've got ourselves a little horse heist in the works here. Diomedes refuses to even get into the chariot. His horse heist plan requires him to stand his ground. He's going to face his chariot-bound attackers on foot, while Sthenelus has been instructed to keep Diomedes' chariot and horses well back from the fighting, so they're safe, because this horse heist plan involves Sthenelus being ready to jump in front from out of nowhere and steal Aeneas' horses and chariot when the time is right. The plan is about to go into motion. The chariot bearing Aeneas and Pandaros is crashing towards Diomedes. Anon, those other twain came near, driving their fleet horses. First to him spake Lycaon's glorious son. O thou strong-souled and cunning, son of proud Tydeus, verily my swift dart vanquished thee not, the bitter arrow. So now will I make trial with my spear, if I can hit thee. He spake, and poised, and hurled his far-shadowing spear, and smote upon Tydides' shield. Right through it sped the point of bronze, and reached the breastplate. So over him shouted loudly Lycaon's glorious son, Thou art smitten through the belly utterly, and I ween thou shalt not long hold up thine head, so thou givest me great renown. From within the chariot, Pandaros yells, he's boasting really, that he's attacking now with a spear since his arrow wasn't successful, and he threw his spear at Diomedes. The spear hurtled through the air, struck Diomedes' shield, and broke right through it. Pandaros again thinks he's scored a hit and boasts loudly about having defeated Diomedes. Has Pandaros killed Diomedes? Will Pandaros's father finally be proud of his son? But mighty Diomedes, unaffrighted, answered him, Thou hast missed and not hit, but ye twain, I deem, shall not cease till one or the other shall have fallen and glutted with blood Ares, the stubborn god of war. Nope, Pandaros sure has not defeated Diomedes. From Pandaros' perspective atop that moving chariot, he could see that his spear had broken through Diomedes' shield, but he didn't see that Diomedes' armor had stopped the spear. Diomedes is fine and announces as much to his attackers. Pandaros has got to be crushed right now. Diomedes repeats his prediction that one or the other of these two attackers, Aeneas or Pandaros, is going to die in this encounter, and he launches his spear at them, while they're still presumably crashing around him on their moving chariot. So spake he, and hurled, and Athene guided the dart upon his nose beside the eye, and it pierced through his white teeth. So the hard bronze cut through his tongue at the root, and the point issued forth by the base of his chin. He fell from his chariot, and his splendid armor gleaming clanged upon him, and the fleet-footed horses swerved aside, so there his soul and strength were unstrung. So Athene has guided Diomedes' throw, and the spear not only hits Pandaros in the head, it's specified to have cut right through his tongue and protrudes below his chin. Pandaros won't do any more bragging, and it's unclear whether his father would be proud of him now or not. I'll give Pandaros a definite maybe. After all, Pandaros did die fighting from atop a chariot against one of the foremost of the Greek heroes. For Diomedes' part, Athene has answered his prayer for revenge. But let's keep in mind, as his Aristeia moves forward, that revenge against the man who shot him with an arrow is not even among the enumerated gifts Athene has granted Diomedes. This revenge is a bonus. It's just the start of things. Athene also gave Diomedes the ability to see through the disguises of the gods, the ability to attack the goddess Aphrodite, and the fury of his father, which so far he's managing much better than his father ever did. Then Aeneas leapt down with shield and long spear, fearing lest perchance the Achaeans might take from him the corpse, and strode over him like a lion, confident in his strength, and held before him his spear and the circle of his shield, eager to slay whosoever should come to face him, crying his terrible cry. Then Tydides grasped in his hand a stone, a mighty deed, such as two men, as men now are, would not avail to lift. Yet he with ease wielded it all alone. Therewith he smote Aeneas on the hip, where the thigh turneth in the hip joint, and this men call the cup bone. So he crushed his cup bone, and brake both sinews withal, and the jagged stone tore apart the skin. Then the hero stayed fallen upon his knees, and with stout hand leant upon the earth, and the darkness of night veiled his eyes. With Pandaros dead, we now have a good old-fashioned corpse squabble. Jumping down from the chariot, Aeneas valiantly defends the dead body of Pandaros against Diomedes, who of course wants to strip his defeated foe of any valuables, especially anything metallic like armor, weapons, and so on. Stuff equals honor. Diomedes wants to nab Pandaros' honor. Aeneas wants to prevent that. This is the part of these corpse squabbles that's harder for us to understand. Easier for us to see is how important it was to prevent the enemy from disrespecting the dead body of your friend. And disrespect for the bodies of the fallen is something we'll see much later on in the Iliad as we approach our climactic conclusion. So Aeneas takes a stand over Pandaros' body to stop Diomedes, but his valiant pose doesn't last long. Diomedes lifts a huge rock, another often repeated phrase, a rock so big no two men nowadays could lift it, and he tosses it down upon Aeneas, crushing his hip bone. And now might Aeneas, king of men, have perished, but that Aphrodite, daughter of Zeus, was swift to mark, even his mother that conceived him by Anchises as he tended the kine. About her dear son wound she her white arms, and spread before his face a fold of her radiant vesture, to be a covering from the darts, lest any of the fleet horse Danaans might hurl the spear into his breast and take away his life. So Aeneas is in real trouble, and if you didn't already know that he'll go on to star in his own epic, you'd have to seriously be worried about him right now. Plot armor will serve him well today. His buddy Pandaros is dead, and his hip bone has just been crushed by Diomedes wielding a giant stone. So we have to imagine he's completely immobilized and at Diomedes' mercy. But Aeneas is saved at the last moment. Aphrodite gives her son the same treatment as she's earlier given Paris, a quick, magical exit from battle. And if you're remembering about now that Athene went out of her way to gift Diomedes with the ability to attack Aphrodite, and have been wondering how Diomedes would end up coming up against her, the pieces should be falling into place for you about now. So was she bearing her dear son away from battle, but the son of Capaneus forgat not the behest that Diomedes of the loud war cry had laid upon him. He refrained his own whole-hooved horses away from the tumult, binding the reins tight to the chariot rim, and leapt on the sleek-coated horses of Aeneas, and drave them from the Trojans to the well-grieved Achaeans, and gave them to Deipylus, his dear comrade, whom he esteemed above all that were his age-fellows, because he was like-minded with himself, and bade him drive them to the hollow ships. Then did the hero mount his own chariot, and take the shining reins, and forthwith drive his strong-hooved horses in quest of Tydides, eagerly. Stephanelos has remembered Diomedes' instructions. He's been ready and waiting, and now's the time for the horse heist. With Diomedes' own horses secured safely behind the Greek lines, Stephanelos jumps into the scene and steals those divine horses, the magnificent descendants of the steeds of Tros, which Aeneas was so proud of, driving them now behind the Greek lines, where he hands them into the care of a Greek named Deipylus, who will take them to the camp for Diomedes. Looting mid-battle, like a video game. I want there to be a satisfying little sound every time they pick up some loot, like a clinking coin sound effect. Returning from securing the stolen horses, Stephanelos now goes looking for Diomedes, but can't find him. Where's Diomedes gone? What follows is one of the craziest chase scenes in the whole of the Iliad. Now Tydides had made onslaught with pitiless weapon on the Cyprian, knowing how she was a coward goddess, and none of those that have mastery in battle of the warriors. No Athene she, nor Enyo, waster of cities. Now when he had pursued her through the dense throng, and come on her, then great-hearted Tydeus' son thrust with his keen spear, and leapt on her, and wounded the skin of her weak hand. Straight through the ambrosial raiment that the Graces themselves had woven her, pierced the dart into the flesh, above the springing of the palm. Then flowed the goddess's immortal blood, such ichor as floweth in the blessed gods. For they eat no bread, neither drink they gleaming wine. Wherefore they are bloodless, and are named immortals. So yes, you've guessed it, Diomedes is chasing after Aphrodite, as she's carrying away her wounded son Aeneas. And with the explicit permission to attack Aphrodite, as well as the ability to see through the disguises of the gods, Diomedes is giving Aphrodite a real run for her money. Pressing through the crowd of battle, Diomedes pursues Aphrodite as she moves swiftly through the throng, counting on her divine disguise to protect her, and oblivious to the actual danger she's in for once. Diomedes sees this opportunity and leaps upon her with spear in hand. The goddess receives a cut on the arm, just above the wrist. She doesn't bleed, or rather, what flows from her wound isn't blood, but ichor, which is what flows in the veins of the immortals. Let's go on a tangent here to explore the nature of divine immortality in Greek mythology and its relationship to this ichor. There are a few different claims online about the qualities of ichor, particularly that if a mortal is touched by this fluid, he dies. But I'm having a tough time finding this claim backed up in any primary sources. What we can say is that ichor and blood both seem to be related to the food that one eats, and that whether one ages or not seems to stem from the ichor or blood that you have as a consequence of eating regular versus divine food. Ichor is said to be bloodless blood, and somehow related to what the gods eat and drink. They eat ambrosia and drink red nectar, which scholar Jenny Strauss-Clay implies is what grants them their agelessness. They are immortal by nature, but ageless because of their diet. And she provides a number of instances where Homer connects the fact that humans eat things like grain to their red blood, which he associates with the fact that we age. It's a complex of ideas among the three factors of nutrition, the fluid in one's body, and aging, the end result of which is that Diomedes has caused that most famously unaging, perpetually beautiful and youthful goddess to spill some of her agelessness-sustaining life fluid upon the battlefield. And she, with a great cry, let fall her son. Him Phoebus Apollo took into his arms, and saved him in a dusky cloud, lest any of the fleet-horsed Danaans might hurl the spear into his breast, and take away his life. But overheard Diomedes of the loud war cry shouted afar, "Refrain thee, thou daughter of Zeus, from war and fighting. Is it not enough that thou beguilest feeble women? But if in battle thou wilt mingle, verily I deem that thou shalt shudder at the name of battle, if thou hear it even from afar. With his ichor-letting strike with his spear upon Aphrodite's hand, Diomedes has caused the goddess to drop her son Aeneas. With Aeneas laying helpless upon the ground, Diomedes would have been able to finish killing Aeneas, but now Apollo quickly intervenes and covers him in the obscuring mist of the gods. At this point in the narrative, it's not entirely clear if Apollo is really able to hide Aeneas, or if Diomedes can see through the obscuring mist cast by Apollo, the same as he could through Aphrodite's. But this differentiation isn't important. What's important is that Aeneas is now protected by a god that, unlike Aphrodite, Diomedes is not allowed to attack. As she's retreating, Diomedes taunts Aphrodite, telling her not to involve herself in warfare. He's getting a little full of himself here. He's still acting within the limits set by Athene, but we have to wonder and worry. Is his father's fury going to overcome him? So spake he, and she departed in amaze, and was sore troubled. And wind-footed Iris took her and led her from the throng, tormented with her pain, and her fair skin was stained. There found she impetuous Ares sitting on the battle's left, and his spear rested upon a cloud, and his fleet steeds. Then she fell on her knees, and with instant prayer besought of her dear brother his golden front-legged steeds. Dear brother, save me and give me thy steeds, that I may win to Olympus, where is the habitation of the immortals. Sorely am I afflicted with a wound, wherewith a mortal smote me, even Tydides, who would now fight even with father Zeus. In pain, Aphrodite leaves the battlefield and is escorted by Iris. We're going to follow Aphrodite for a bit here, where we'll track what a few other of the gods are up to, and then we'll get into a little discussion about the role of the gods, and finally a bit of comic relief before we get back to the battle. Aphrodite and Iris find Ares, who has just been sitting by the river this whole time after Athene duped him into parking himself uselessly here. What's he been up to this whole time, Ares, god of war, during the biggest battle of all time? Maybe Ares is skipping stones into the river. I have no idea. Aphrodite begs him to use his divine horses so she can safely return to Olympus. So spake she, and Ares gave her his golden front-legged steeds, and she mounted on the chariot sore at heart. By her side mounted Iris, and in her hands grasped the reins and lashed the horses to start them, and they flew onward, nothing loth. Of course, Ares lets her use his horses, and she and Iris ride off for heaven. And hearing how things are going for the Trojans, of course, now Ares is going to re-enter the battle, with a special eye toward getting revenge on Diomedes for hurting his sister. This should spell trouble for Diomedes. He's about to confront the god of war himself in battle. Does Ares realize he was duped by Athene? We get no indication that he realizes this just yet, but by the end of Book 5, Ares will have had it up to here with Athene. Not that anyone cares what he thinks. Before we get to the face-off between Ares and Diomedes, however, we're going to follow Aphrodite as she reaches Olympus. Thus soon they came to the habitation of the gods, even steep Olympus. There wind-footed fleet Iris loosed the horses from the chariot and stabled them, and set ambrosial forage before them. But fair Aphrodite fell upon Dione's knees, that was her mother. She took her daughter in her arms, and stroked her with her hand, and spake, and called upon her name. Who now of the sons of heaven, dear child, hath entreated thee thus wantonly? As though thou wert a wrongdoer in the face of all. Then laughter-loving Aphrodite made answer to her, Tydeus' son wounded me, high-hearted Diomedes, because I was saving from the battle my dear son Aeneas, who is to me dearest far of all men. For no more is the fierce battle cry for Trojans and Achaeans, but the Danaans now are fighting, even the immortals. Then the fair goddess Dione answered her, Be of good heart, my child, and endure for all thy pain. For many of us that inhabit the mansions of Olympus have suffered through men, in bringing grievous woes one upon another. So suffered Ares, when Otos and stalwart Ephialtes, sons of Elias, bound him in a strong prison house. Yea, in a vessel of bronze lay he bound 13 months. Then might Ares insatiate of battle have perished, but that the stepmother of Elias' sons, fair Eriboia, gave tidings to Hermes, and he stole away Ares, already pining, for the grievous prison house was wearing him out. So suffered Hera, when Amphitriten's stalwart son smote her on the right breast with a 3-barbed arrow, so that pain unassuageable gat hold of her likewise. So suffered awful Hades, a swift arrow like the rest, when this same man, the son of Aegis-bearing Zeus, smote him in Pylos amid the dead, and gave him over to anguish. And he went to the mansion of Zeus and to high Olympus, grieved at heart, pierced through with anguish, for the arrow was driven into his stout shoulder, and vexed his soul. But Paeon spread soothing drugs upon the wound, and healed him, seeing that he verily was of no mortal substance. Headstrong man, and violent of deed, that recked not of his evil doings, and with his archery vexed the gods that dwell in Olympus. So upon thee was this man sent by the bright-eyed goddess Athene, fond man. For the heart of Tydeus the son knoweth not this, that he of a surety is not long lived that fighteth with immortals, nor ever do his children prattle upon his knees at his returning from war and terrible fray. Therefore now let Tydides, though he be very mighty, beware, lest one better than thou encounter him. And so Aegialeia, wise daughter of Adrestos, wake from sleep with lamentations all her household, bewailing her wedded lord, the best man of the Achaeans, even she that is the brave wife of horse-taming Diomedes. Aphrodite and Iris left the battlefield, riding Ares' chariot up into the sky. We're now in the divine mansions upon Olympus, where Aphrodite is being comforted by her mother Dione. Notice that Iris feeds ambrosial forage to Ares' divine horses, another of these subtle links between immortality and what one eats. But let's follow this conversation between Aphrodite and her mother, a goddess named Dione. In a number of other sources, Aphrodite is not the daughter of Dione, but rather the daughter of the male god Cronus alone, placing Aphrodite in the same generation as Zeus and Hera, and therefore at their same level of respect and honor, rather than the generation after them. And there is yet a third view on Aphrodite's parentage, which gives her an even higher status than that of the Olympians and their children, in the obscure beliefs of those who followed the Orphic tradition, which was a set of ancient mystery cults. As the goddess of regeneration and life, Aphrodite was the mother of Ananke, which is necessity, and the fates themselves obey her. Here in the Iliad, Dione is her mother. This goddess's name means simply goddess, and she was something of a nebulous figure, but seemingly a female counterpart to Zeus. Here in the Iliad, Dione was likely among the Titans, that previous generation of gods of whom Cronus was the king and who Zeus his son defeated to become the current king. The name Dione, or apparent earlier versions of it, appear in some very, very ancient inscriptions. Dione was quite possibly an image of a female divine ruler who predated Hera as the queen of heaven in more ancient and not frequently recorded mythology. In the Iliad, Dione kind of awkwardly still exists in an unclear relationship to Zeus and to Hera. Regardless of what exactly the author of the Iliad intended Dione to be, here Dione comforts Aphrodite by attempting to reinforce for Aphrodite just how different and better the gods are than humans. However, Dione's attempt at showing this gap between the mortals and divine isn't very successful. A bit later on in Book 5, Apollo will do a much better job of this, and much more succinctly. For what it's worth, here's what Dione has to say. She reminds Aphrodite of several instances when other gods have been harmed by mortals, pointing out that the gods are different from mortals, and unlike us gods, those mortals won't all return from battle. She also says that Diomedes will pay for his harming of her with an early death. Her examples, however, are not that clear. The characters she cites are all demigods and not mortals, and anyway, Diomedes doesn't suffer an early death for his offense. He's actually among the very few Greek heroes who go on to have a long and very successful post-war life. Author Rebecca Ann Deitch's article titled Diomedes, Dione, and Divine Insecurity in Iliad 5 through 8 gets into the idea of psychological insecurity on the part of the gods, which is a very interesting take on what's at play here between Aphrodite and her mother. Deitch points out that Dione's speech to Aphrodite is intended to reaffirm the line between gods and mortals as a way of reassuring and comforting her daughter. You're special, they're not. But as we've seen, Dione does a lousy job of this, and the only part of her speech that holds any water is when she shifts the blame for Aphrodite's hurt from Diomedes to Athene. So the line between gods and mortals isn't all that clear. What Deitch really ends up saying is that the clear line isn't so much between mortal and immortal, but between Zeus and everyone else, that the current cosmic order depends solely upon the strength of Zeus alone to uphold it. And in the end, it will indeed be Zeus's decree that finally tips this cosmic teeter-totter of a war between the Greeks and Trojans firmly toward a decisive ending, but not before much, much more drama. So saying, with both hands she wiped the ichor from the arm. Her arm was comforted, and the grievous pangs assuaged. But Athene and Hera beheld, and with bitter words provoked Zeus, the son of Cronos. Of them was the bright-eyed goddess Athene first to speak. Father Zeus, wilt thou indeed be wroth with me whatever I say? Verily I ween that the Cyprian was urging some woman of Achaia to join her unto the Trojans, whom she so marvellously loveth. And stroking such an one of the fair-robed women of Achaia, she tore upon the golden brooch her delicate hand. So spake she, and the father of gods and men smiled, and called unto him golden Aphrodite, and said, Not unto thee, my child, are given the works of war, but follow thou after the loving tasks of wedlock. And to all these things shall fleet Ares and Athene look. Athene and Hera are watching this sweet interaction between Aphrodite and her mother Dione, and Athene makes fun of Aphrodite with a joke, downplaying her injury, saying basically that Aphrodite must have hurt herself on a piece of lady's jewelry while trying to convince a Greek woman, implying Helen here, to go off with one of the Trojan men that she loves so much. And this is especially mean, given that it was Athene's warrior using her power that wounded Aphrodite. Zeus, of course, isn't going to be mad at Athene no matter what she says. She's always going to be Zeus's favorite. But in this instance, he's actually a very sweet father towards Aphrodite, and comforts Aphrodite while also reminding her that war isn't her strong suit. Leave war to Ares and Athene. And that's it for our little interlude upon Olympus.